Wonderful. So looking at our data from this poll, the majority of us said that what they think voters are most excited about is AI making tools to, let's see, AI tools making daily life easier. Um, but what we look at when we're looking at the data is we asked voters how do they feel about the uses of AI, and we asked them if they're concerned, neutral, or excited. And what we found is that the most excited thing that voters are is about AI tools used to help with learning a new topic, and like us in the room, AI tools for making daily tasks easier. On the alternatively, what are voters most concerned about? AI bots that post content online. This is very relevant to the topic that we're talking about today, and AI generated images or videos that look realistic. Um, we asked a handful of questions about AI. They're not going to be focused in this webinar, but if you're interested in more of this data, you're attending, so we'll be making sure to follow up with the data from this presentation. So jumping on into it, I'm going to give a quick intro and then hand it over. Like I said, I'm Melanie Phillips. I'm the head of the analyst team. We have our co-founder and CEO, Mike Greenfield. And then we have our two incredible analysts, Sumati and Bharti, who will be leading the research portion of this. And with that, I'm going to hand it on over to Mike to give a bit of an introduction about change and Embold research.
Awesome. Thank you, Melanie. I'm excited to be here today. Thank you all for joining us. Change Research was founded in 2017, and this company exists to make the world more humane, scientific, and just by improving the way that people get access to public opinion data. Change Research works on the political side. Embold Research is non-political, and we have an amazing team of pollsters, engineers, data scientists that are trying to make public opinion a little bit more understood. We conduct polls online. We are proud of our products and our technologies. Spark is a fast way to conduct polling in standardized forms. Magnify is a new take on custom modeling that uses AI, and Voices is a way to go deep with qualitative research. Change Research has always prided ourselves as being fast, accurate, and affordable. We move very quickly and have a very technology-centered approach to public opinion polling. We're proud of our accuracy and have consistently been trying to improve the way that we conduct polling to make it as accurate as possible. And we're quite transparent about our accuracy. And we also pride ourselves on being affordable. One of the big things about Change Research and about this model is we fundamentally believe that by collecting data and aggregating it in smart ways, that we can drive deeper insights. I think a lot of the field of polling, the approach tends to be run a survey of 600 people, look at the data, write a report, and then for all intents and purposes, throw that data away and never look at it again. That's very much not the way that we're set up. We want to learn from all the work that we've done over the course of the 8 years that we've been in business, and we have over 300 million data points that we use to feed our AI systems and more. A new product for us, and one that our clients are finding value in, is our Compass Polls Insider subscription. And the way that works is that our customers are getting access to polls like the one you see today. They're getting early access to that, and they're both able to browse through that data in more traditional ways, and also ask AI type questions about that feed off of real data to look at what people feel about specific issues. And we have maintained our approach of affordability with that. Compass Compass Poll Insider subscription is $500 a month or $5,000 a year. Please email us at subscriptions@changeresearch.com if that is of interest to you. With that, I am excited to hand off to my colleague Sumati, who will walk you through the methodology and then dig into the data.
Thanks so much, Mike. Yeah, so we surveyed over 2,000 Americans to understand how they're navigating today's complex digital landscape. This survey was fielded nationwide from June 12th through the 20th. And just keep in mind, as we go through this data, our modeled margin of error is plus or minus 2.5%. We'll explore 4 key themes about how Americans are navigating today's digital landscape. First, we'll examine how people use social media. Then we'll dive into Americans' trust in media and news sources. We'll look at how influencers shape people's views, and we'll explore how different social media feeds are creating different realities for people. Finally, we'll discuss some paths forward and just for rebuilding trust and reaching voters. So the digital landscape we live in, this section will explore just what we scroll, how we scroll, and what that reveals about our identities, our habits, and our values. Social media use is pretty much near universal. What's surprising is who's using it, how often, and why. 70% of Americans across all age groups check social media multiple times a day. Even 65% of seniors log in daily. Most people are using these platforms for vibes, not politics, and our younger adults, it's social media is very emotional. These platforms can feel like lifelines. So daily scrolling is the norm across all ages. Again, you see that 71% check social media multiple times a day or constantly. That includes 79% for 18 to 34-year-olds. This is our heaviest users of social media. Even among seniors, we see that 65% say that they check social media multiple times per day. 4% say they check it constantly. The idea that older folks aren't online is pretty outdated. They may use different platforms, but they are still very much scrolling. And only 2% say they don't use social media at all. Social media, again, has really become nearly universal in all of our lives. The daily scrolling, again, is a norm across all ages. Just 70, I'm sorry, a little messed up there. When asked why they use social media, Americans overwhelmingly said it's to stay connected to others and to be entertained. 65% use social media primarily to connect with people they know personally, seeing what friends and family are up to, checking in on communities, and engaging in conversation. Entertainment is nearly as important. We see that 63% say that they watch content for humor, memes, or dance videos. About half follow news and educational content and other news organizations and journalists. Political content is followed by 44% of users overall, and that rises to 50% among Democrats. Really, the takeaway here is that even in a polarized political environment, people are looking for emotional escape and social bonding. When we ask how people feel about social media in general, the results show a real love-hate relationship. 15% love it, and 26% say they like it, but it can feel overwhelming at times. 37% are neutral, they can take it or leave it. Another 16% don't really like social media, but they say they use it anyway. And 4% say they actively avoid it when they can. Now, younger voters are the most enthusiastic. We see that 26% of 18 to 34-year-olds say that they love social media. Among Democrats, we see that 18% say the same. Meanwhile, middle-aged adults and independents are the most skeptical groups. They're either skeptical or negative in their views around social media. These attitudes reflect the broader role that social media plays in different people's lives, not just by age, but also by political identity as well. Now, most Americans say they do keep up with the news. Older adults and Democrats, we see, are a little bit more highly engaged. 56% of Americans actively say they actively keep up with news and check multiple sources regularly. Another 26% follow stories and seek out news on topics of interest. We see that 14% say that they are aware of the news and skim it, and only 4% say that they don't follow the news at all. Democrats show higher engagement, with 61% saying they actively follow news versus 53% of Republicans. Engagement also increases dramatically with age. We see that 65% of those 65 and above say that they are active news consumers. So no, we see that most actively seek out news, but we also see some, that young people are less likely to do so. We ask people just how does news come up in their feeds? Do they actively seek it out, or does it just come across their feeds passively? We see that 59% of Americans say that they primarily seek out news themselves, while 41% mostly encounter it passively. We do see a partisan gap here with 65% of Democrats saying that they seek out news, compared to just 54% of Republicans and independents. Older adults are the most intentional news consumers, while younger adults are more likely to say they come across news while scrolling for something else. This distinction matters. People who passively consume news are more likely to be influenced by algorithms, personalization, and potentially misleading content. When it comes to learning more about a news story, search engines lead, but social media isn't far behind. Overall, 41% of Americans say that they go to search engines like Google or Bing when they want to learn more about a story. Social media is close behind with 37% overall. Younger adults, especially, see social media as the way to learn more about a story. Overall, we see that 53% of 18 to 34 year olds say that they use platforms like Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook to learn more. YouTube is also a major news source for younger Americans. Traditional news still matters. We see that 32% cite local news, especially among older adults and Democrats, with 39% for both of those groups. We also see some partisan divides. Half of Republicans say they turn to sources like Fox News, while Democrats turn to sources like NPR or MSNBC. So, really, this era of a single trusted news source is over. People blend a combination of digital, TV, and personal sources. So, humor and news top many of our feeds. When we ask people what type of content they engage with, 62% say that news and current events are the things that they tune to. Are 60, and then 60% say that humor and memes are what they tune into. And local news and community updates capture 55% of interest. Personal interest also varies by demographic. We see that younger audiences favor content about education and travel. Women prioritize content about food and pets, and men gravitate towards topics like sports and patriotic content about like gun rights or the Constitution. There are some partisan divides that show up here as well. Republicans and older voters engage more with local news, religion, and patriotic themes. Democrats and younger voters tend to lean more into pop culture and identity content. When it comes to what people actually click on and say they watch all the way through, again, humor and memes and feel good content tops that list. Humor, memes, cute animals, tops the engagement across every demographic. 53% say they engage with humor and memes and satire content. Pets and other feel good content come next at 47%. This is followed by educational content and news clips, both at 39%, political commentary at 37%, and content that aligns with their views or values at 36%. This tells us a lot. Really, people want to feel good online. They're not coming to fight, they are coming to laugh and have fun. Without social media, many would feel disconnected when asked about how they would feel if social media were to go away today. Nearly 1 in 3 would feel cut off from friends and family. 40% of young adults say that they feel disconnected or sad without social media, a large jump compared to other groups where just 25 to 29% say the same. Younger voters are also more likely to say that they feel bored or isolated. Meanwhile, 19% of Americans say that they'd feel relieved seeing it as a chance to read more or pick up hobbies. 25% said that it wouldn't really affect them at all, that life would just go on. And when asked what they do instead if internet was, social media was to go away, 62% said they'd read more. 48% said they turn to music and podcasts. 44% said they watch more shows or movies. When we ask people like if they go to another app or anything, like only 9% said that they would look for another app to scroll through. So we've seen how embedded social media is in our daily lives, but that doesn't mean that people trust what they see there. So let's break down what this trust looks like. It's not just low trust, it's fractured, it's partisan, and sometimes cynical. Nearly half of Americans say that they don't trust any platform for news. Republicans reject platforms like TikTok and Facebook. Democrats reject Truth Social. Independents, they tend to reject everyone. 63% say what they see online only sometimes matches what they hear from politicians or the news. And for many reasons, this erosion of trust in traditional media isn't new. For some, it just never existed to begin with. So here's the reality in the numbers. Nearly half of Americans just say flat out that they don't trust any of these platforms or apps to deliver accurate news. 46% selected none of these when asked to select what apps or platforms they do trust for news. YouTube leads out of all of these apps, but just with 17% of those that say they trust it, followed by Twitter or X at 16%. Facebook is trusted by only 13%. TikTok and newer platforms score even lower. So this lack of trust is pretty universal. When asked about what apps specifically they do not trust, we followed this up. So if they selected an app that they do trust, we gave all the remaining list and said what apps do they do not trust. 56% say that TikTok and 55% say Facebook as apps they do not trust. Both Truth Social and Twitter are also not trusted by 52% of adults. While we see some universal skepticism, there are also some partisan differences here. 73% of Democrats do not trust Truth Social, compared to 25% of Republicans that say they distrust it. 65 to 67% of Republicans distrust TikTok and Facebook, compared to 43 to 44% of Democrats that say they distrust that platform. And independents are most likely to say they trust no platform at all. 59% stated they trust none of the platforms that we listed. But even among younger adults, nearly half distrust TikTok, 46% distrust, only 20% said they do trust it. Facebook and Twitter. The bottom line really is that Americans approach every source with heavy skepticism. People aren't just skeptical of these platforms, they're also noticing some real disconnect with what they see online and what they hear from news and politicians. Just 14% say that online posts match what they hear from news or politicians. 63% say that it's sometimes similar, sometimes different. And pure independents, Republicans and those 35 to 49-year-olds, they are the most likely to perceive some of these differences. And we also see that 16% say that online content is mostly different than what they see from mainstream news. So when information conflicts, when a post says one thing and the news says another, who do people believe? The biggest group says none of them. 41% don't trust any source when the information conflicts. This is the largest group. Traditional news media edges out at 25%, but that is still pretty low. Only 16% default to believing what they see online. And younger adults are slightly more trusting of online content at 30%. Democrats lean more towards traditional news at 37%, but skepticism still exists among different Democrats, with 25% saying they do not trust any source when there's a conflict. We asked directly, has online content changed their trust in traditional media? For many Americans, the answer is yes. The 32% say that online content has made them trust traditional news less. Democrats are more likely to maintain their original level of trust at 44%. And over a third of independents and 31% of Republicans say they never trusted traditional news. Only 7% say online content has increased their trust in traditional news sources. So let's look at who people say they actually trust. The fragmentation is real in many of these groups, and we ask people just an open-ended question to see what individuals they do trust the most and what comes to mind. So traditional news figures like Lester Holt and Dan Rather still have some crossover appeal, especially among older Americans. Republicans tend to cluster around figures like Elon Musk, Charlie Kirk, Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro. But we see that among Democrats, they trust a broader mix of people, including people like Rachel Maddow, Barack Obama, Jon Stewart, Robert Reich, and Heather Cox Richardson. Younger voters trust creators, YouTubers, podcasters, indie journalists, people like Joe Rogan and Hassan Piker. Older adults tend to lean more towards classic columnists and news anchors. And many people cite their family and friends or even themselves as who they trust most for news as their news source. But I'll hand it off to Bharti, who's going to go a little bit deeper into what I think is like some of the most fascinating parts of our research, just the role of these influencers have on shaping how people think about politics, culture, and community.
Thanks so much, Sumati. Hi, everyone. Good to be here with you today. I'm going to be talking first about how influencers become instigators. That is when content takes a hard political turn. So just some of our key takeaways here to preface the findings in the rest of this section. So first is that we see conservative voices dominate the creator landscape, although I will say the caveat here is that this largely reflects Republican audience consolidation around fewer major figures. The pipeline is real, and people notice that. 49%, or just under half, have seen creators they followed pivot from entertainment content to politics and conspiracy. And when creators cross lines, audiences disengage. 59% prefer to unfollow or block rather than argue when the content that they see from the creators they follow becomes too extreme or angry. And I think most importantly, Americans see through the outrage economy. Most recognize controversial content as transparent attention seeking rather than any kind of genuine political belief. As I mentioned, though the creator landscape appears to be dominated by conservative voices, this is really driven by Republican audiences being more consolidated in their media consumption habits. So 54% of Republicans have engaged with Charlie Kirk's content, and 41% have engaged with Candace Owens' content in the past 6 months or so, compared to Democrats who don't really have one or two very dominant creators. Similarly, conservative podcasts, in particular, like the Joe Rogan Experience, top the list due to, again, this Republican consolidation. And this is a pattern that we've seen in other research that we've done on this topic, where Democrats are much more decentralized and there isn't one overwhelmingly dominant force in the left's content ecosystem in terms of online, in terms of streaming, in terms of podcasts, etc. Independents are also relatively scattered, but conservative creators still lead in engagement among this group. On the other hand, entertainment and lifestyle creators such as Mr. Beast still maintain relatively balanced audiences across party lines. 24% of Democrats and 26% of Republicans have engaged with Mr. Beast content in the past 6 months, suggesting that non-political content remains one of the few shared cultural spaces Americans are still inhabiting together. It also demonstrates how younger voters, in particular, are significantly shaping digital spaces. 39% of those 18 to 34 have engaged with Mr. Beast's content recently, compared to 24% overall. But the right is steadily encroaching here. Theo Vaughn tops the list among independents at 23% and is a close second to Mr. Beast among Republicans. And this, to me, represents an opportunity for bridge building that political creators have largely abandoned, and shows the need to engage with existing creators and support new creators in the entertainment space who can effectively reach diverse, varied audiences in a way that political creators really can't. In terms of the types of content Americans follow, they're increasingly self-sorting into political information silos, with partisans consuming significantly more ideological content than any other category. 51% of Democrats follow creators who make left-leaning or progressive content, and 44% of Republicans follow creators who make right-leaning or conservative content. And then you also have 50% of Republicans who follow, putting America first content or MAGA content. And this really represents a fundamental shift from entertainment first to politics first content consumption that is accelerating polarization, particularly among partisans. In the responses to this open-ended question, we found that despite deep political divisions, Americans show remarkable agreement on the most egregious forms of harmful content online, particularly when it comes to violence and the exploitation of children. Republicans and Democrats alike cite threatening political opponents, doxing, and inciting violence as unacceptable. Across the political spectrum, Americans also say that exploiting minors is their strongest red line. There's a lot of concern about family channels profiting off of kids, grooming, as well as the increased prevalence of child sexual content online. However, Americans are also fracturing along predictable partisan lines when it comes to misinformation and identity politics, with each side viewing the other's concerns as unacceptable and fundamentally incorrect. Each side's misinformation is essentially the other side's truth. I'll also note that there are some generational divides here, not just political divides, on harmful content, particularly the appropriateness of sexual content in particular. Those who are older frequently cite nudity, pornography, and sexual exploitation as crossing lines, while younger folks focus more on consent and context when it comes to this type of content. OnlyFans and thirst trap content, for example, are particularly triggering to older conservatives. As Americans encounter political or controversial content from creators they follow, a majority, 57%, don't make snap judgments. Instead, they take a wait and see approach based on what creators actually say, going to show Americans are looking for, more nuance. They're more nuanced consumers of controversy than creators might assume, and they're looking for authenticity rather than just pure provocation for the sake of provocation. There are some racial differences here, with Hispanic and Black voters more likely to ignore new controversial content from their creators or mute and unfollow those creators entirely relative to their white and AAPI counterparts. Over 6 in 10, 61% of Americans followed someone online who initially seemed reasonable, but later started posting more extreme or angry content online. But when creators cross the line into what is perceived as extreme or angry content, Americans overwhelmingly choose to disengage rather than fight back, with nearly 60% simply unfollowing or blocking, including 68% of independents, which is higher than the share of Democrats and Republicans who say the same. Using harsh rhetoric turns people off, and the quiet quitting of toxic creators suggests that there are limits to the outrage economy, and people are definitely opting out of what they deem to be out of line. But this also doesn't mean that that content isn't still there online. A bare majority of Americans, 49%, say they started following a creator for one type of content and noticed it getting more political or opinionated over time. Among those respondents, the most common pathway to more extremist or political content online starts with comedy at 38%, with creators using humor in this space as a gateway to more divisive content over time, and this is consistent across party lines. There are some differences here by gender and age. Partisanship isn't the only factor. It is an important one, but it's not the only one influencing the content people see. And new political or opinion content permeates a lot of non-political spaces, including the motivation, homesteading, and fashion and lifestyle content women report consuming at higher rates. As creators turn towards expressing their politics and opinions online, these folks are increasingly making content that blames and targets specific groups of people at 37%, rather than focusing on policy issues. It's a largely partisan phenomenon, with over half of independents, 54%, saying these creators started posting more blame game content, so to speak, compared to 38% of Democrats. 43% of Republicans, however, say those creators started posting more woke content instead. Americans are also being exposed to more and more alternative wellness trends online, with a majority, 51%, reporting they've encountered content about eliminating artificial food dyes and rejecting processed foods in favor of natural alternatives. These aren't niche diet trends. They represent a fundamental shift in how Americans think about food safety and corporate trustworthiness. 45% have seen content expressing skepticism towards vaccines in favor of natural immunity, especially white voters, connecting to other trends like avoiding fluoride at 41% and seed oils at 37%, just in terms of the share of folks who have encountered these particular trends online recently, which altogether suggest an increase in systematic rejection of conventional medical and public health recommendations. Republicans are slightly more likely to embrace natural approaches like eliminating food dyes, 59% versus 44% among Democrats, and avoiding seed oils, 41% versus 31% among Democrats, illustrating their greater receptiveness to pro-natural messaging around health, as well as the MAHA movement's growing influence in the political mainstream. In turn, Americans tend to support the alternative wellness trends they encounter more frequently. So we have 79% who support eliminating artificial food dyes, little over half have encountered it online recently. And then similarly, 78% support rejecting processed foods in favor of natural alternatives. Again, just over half have encountered it online recently, really showing that algorithmic amplification can breed acceptance and legitimize fringe health benefits. However, greater exposure can also make some of these trends, like vaccine skepticism, for example, which the MAHA movement has made more prominent, more divisive. 32% support it, 52% think it's harmful, and about 45% have seen this trend before. So there has been a lot of exposure to this particular trend relative to many of the others that we tested. Here we asked survey respondents how they usually feel when they see creators or influencers post shocking or controversial content online. A plurality, 42% of Americans see through this manufactured controversy, recognizing it as transparent attempts to go viral rather than a form of genuine political expression. Audiences have developed a level of immunity to manufactured content and understand the economic incentives that are driving provocative content. But there are some partisan and generational differences here too. Republicans are more likely to simply ignore controversial content, 38% versus 30% among Democrats, and are less concerned that people will even take it seriously, 33% versus 39% among Democrats. Those under 50 are also more likely to see controversial content as refreshing or honest at 19%, compared to those over 50 at 6%. In this next section, I'm going to be talking a little bit about how there are polarization and perception gaps that are feeding into our digital echo chambers and influencing our feeds. So just some key takeaways here. We see that Americans are curating vastly different online experiences for themselves, where young adults, for example, want learning and more entertainment online or content that relates to their hobbies, while older adults are retreating to relatively quieter corners of the internet. I think the internet echo chamber in particular is talked about a lot, but only 20% of Americans say their corner of the internet is full of people who think like me. So people are being exposed to a lot more content that they may not necessarily fully agree with and may not fully appreciate either, but nonetheless, it is still there. People can't completely silo themselves off of everything. Some of the, attitudes on discussions of race online really reveal some of our deepest partisan divides. 62% of Democrats say we need to keep talking about race, while 67% of Republicans feel like everyone is just trying to be offended by something. And related to that, Republicans are shutting down and Democrats are leaning in when, their beliefs are challenged online. Republicans report feeling exhausted, but Democrats are curious to understand different perspectives and see where they're coming from. So here we asked survey respondents how they would describe their particular corner of the internet. There is a big generational divide, as I mentioned, in online curation. Those 18 to 34 are actively shaping their online spaces for learning at 54% and hobbies and entertainment at 50% relative to other age groups, while you have their older counterparts are a little more scattered in terms of what they want out of their internet experience, as well as increasingly retreating to those quieter corners of the internet. There's also a very big political divide. Democrats are more likely to want very political or intense content at 34% versus Republicans at 26%. And independents show the least appetite for political intensity when it comes to their online experience. Despite concern about echo chambers, as I said, only a fifth of Americans say their corner of the internet is full of people who think like me, with Democrats slightly more likely to acknowledge this relative to Republicans, illustrating that people, as I said, are encountering some diversity of thought online, even if they don't appreciate it. Given that people online have a lot of different opinions about race and identity, we asked respondents how they felt about that, and the gap between partisans on discussing race online reveals some of the most profound partisan divides in our data. Republicans see performative discussions everywhere. More than half, 58%, say they're glad stories and voices are being represented in media, but 67% simultaneously believe people are just trying to be offended by something. This apparent contradiction suggests Republicans are distinguishing between authentic representation and what they see as being manufactured outrage. Democrats, on the other hand, actively seek racial content. They're more than 5 times as likely as Republicans to actively look for content about race and identity, 28% among Democrats versus 5% among Republicans, and about 2/3 want to keep the conversation going. Then independents largely prefer to focus on individual experiences rather than group identities at 47%. Taken together, these are fundamentally different information-seeking behaviors around these topics by partisanship. In the responses to this open-ended question, we see that despite deep partisan fractures, there is bipartisan frustration with performative identity politics as well as social media manipulation. Americans across party lines recognize when activism feels hollow, with conservatives frustrated by box checking, so to speak, diversity efforts, and liberals critical of identity-centered branding that feels hollow and isn't backed up by what they perceive to be any real action. Americans also recognize when social media amplifies division, even if they disagree on who's ultimately responsible for that. There's consensus that artificial amplification through algorithms, foreign influence, or clickbait is making identity conflicts worse than they need to be online. There's also a lot of anxiety about saying the wrong thing and being canceled or judged as a result of that, especially with the internet feeling so unforgiving and permanent to many Americans online. The responses to this question also reveal deep partisan divides in terms of how Americans process the disagreement that is happening online. And it really shows two distinct approaches: intellectual curiosity versus emotional exhaustion. 46% of Republicans feel exhausted by challenging content versus just 17% of Democrats, while 48% of Democrats are curious about where perspectives that challenge their own come from, and just 12% of Republicans say the same. Additionally, Republicans are 4 times more likely to want the conversation to stop altogether when it comes to challenging topics or perspectives that are, challenging their beliefs. It isn't just disagreement, it's a desire to end the discourse altogether. I'll also note that communities of color approach this disagreement as a learning opportunity. Asian Americans lead in curiosity about different perspectives at 43%. Black Americans are twice as likely to feel inspired to learn more at 27%. And Hispanic Americans are more likely to feel conflicted but engaged at 17%. So we want to spend the last section of this particular presentation on talking about ways that we can move forward. These aren't prescriptive recommendations by any means. I think it's important to think of them as strategic openings, food for thought as we move forward. So here's a quick summary of the signals we're seeing. The through line here is that people trust people, and creators often play a bigger role than institutions. So the first is that people are getting their news and content from different places now. There is no mainstream anymore. There are just many streams. And the second is that Republican audiences are tightly clustered around a handful of talking heads and channels. Democrats are split among many voices across many platforms, and this is what we see that's affecting both information flow as well as message discipline. The third is that the pipeline is real. Most users online do notice when the creators that they follow and the content that they like from those creators pivots from fun to politics or conspiracy, and mostly they just quietly tune out. But this doesn't mean that extreme content is fading away just because engagement changes, especially in the context of the data that we talked about in terms of partisans and the overwhelmingly political and ideological content that they're consuming. The fourth is that, everyone, but especially younger people and communities of color, are more influenced by creators and influencers, not traditional news. And so creators are really driving the conversation because right now, people trust others' personal experiences of events more than expert-driven reporting of those events in many contexts. The fifth is that, trust is personal. People ultimately trust, no matter what's happening online, their family, their friends, and local voices over national influencers. Most Americans value firsthand stories and direct experience, and that's ultimately the best way to connect with them. And finally, there are fundamentally different worldviews between partisans on how much attention race should receive in public discourse online. And so as a result of that, Democrats and Republicans process disagreement online differently. They're either emotionally exhausted or intellectually curious. So you may be wondering, how do we move forward from here? And so these are just some thoughts that we had on how rebuilding trust means leaning into authenticity, nuance, and shared values. 41% trust none of what they see. And one way to tackle this could be moving away from flashy messaging and instead elevating real voices and authentic experiences. And this is really key. Just given how much distrust there is, despite the fact that, as Sumati mentioned, a lot of people are still heavily using these different online platforms. 39% say their feeds mix views. One possible approach is to use more nuance and less noise. The internet can be a really unforgiving place that traps all of us into silos. So spotlighting stories or content where people change their minds, admit uncertainty, express vulnerability, or find common ground can be so valuable, important, not content where people are provoking or digging their heels in just for the sake of doing it. 76% say the other party lives in another reality. And one way to address this, as well as the polarization that we see, that's kind of the common theme throughout a lot of this data in terms of how people are consuming content online and processing it, is to focus on stories that reflect shared values and relational understanding, not ideological purity. And speaking to the electoral context, this could be an important step in building a multiracial working class coalition that the left needs in order to win. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Sumati to talk through more of our approaches or suggestions for strengthening trust and reach.
Thanks. And yeah, I'll try to quickly go through this. That way we have some time for some questions. But one way to understand what's working in our fragmented media ecosystem is to look beyond breakout stars and focus on what actually connects. Our findings suggest that real life, like food, family, humor, that breaks through better than politics alone. So in a fractured media landscape, networks of authentic messengers appear to outform singular influencers, especially on the left. So we don't need to cultivate the next podcast bro. Really building trust across platforms and personalities seems to be a better approach. Audiences want a mix of real, relatable voices. People who break through talk more than about policy and politics. Again, people want to learn more about people's everyday lives through food, through family, humor, and culture. And then algorithms change. Our core values are really less fluid. There may be more durability in supporting a constellation of messengers, creators, validators, volunteers, than relying on a single platform or messenger. Meet people where they are. And as we've seen from the data, they are on many different platforms and many different places. And just to cap off, just equip people with real people The data suggests trust is built through relationships and transparency. If the trust in the platform is low, one way to re-engage people is by equipping everyday messengers and helping people understand just how content reaches them. Take internet culture seriously, especially when trying to reach younger voters. They're immersed in internet culture and it is their language. So engage authentically with internet culture, but don't try to go viral just for viral's sake. Keep it real. People know when it's fake and people will tune out. And be transparent about the pipeline. People know that algorithms are continuing to shape what they see. One way to tackle this is by giving people tips and tools for managing their feed and controlling what reaches them. Transparency can build trust. So really finding ways to give people these tools can help them understand what they're seeing in their feeds, help them keep from being trapped in a pipeline and have more control and feel less manipulated. With that, I'll turn it back to Melanie and we can take some questions.
This is great, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm going to read out a handful of questions, panel style, and then we can respond to what we can. In addition, while we're doing that, I'm going to put up our last poll, which is just a question on if you want us to follow up with any of our data. We will be sending out to the attendees these slides and can send out the recording if requested. So a handful of questions to our incredible analysts today. Can you unpack the outrage economy point? Is talking about controversial content anything political? How is that defined? Another attendee asked, curious how grooming was defined, given the conservative sects consider drag stories or even LGBTQ teachers as grooming, or was it an open-ended question and people responded with grooming? Another question that said the list of podcasters or influencers that each side listens to is super interesting. Would we be able to see all the names? Ross, I'm sure we can follow up with that. And to what extent does the platform or the creator influencer trust matter, given that most people are using social media platforms and engaging with creators? We're getting more questions in, but two more I'll read out to you and pick and choose what you can respond to. What were the other responses options offered on the my corner of the internet is full of people who think like me question? And let's see. To what extent are respondents' stated behavior about tuning out extreme views and behavior aligned with observed behavior, since social media platforms are built on engagement? Engagement is often driven by conflict or extreme personalities. The other ones we can respond to and follow up. The research is disaggregated by data and age, and we can look at that as well. So 4 minutes, I have full faith.
Yep. Yeah, I can say like as far as like unpacking just that outrage economy and just people talking about controversial content. I think that also aligns with some of the other questions here. I feel like people there is a kind of a disconnect in like what we do like see when we scroll. People do love to get into comment wars with people. But from these responses, it seems like people don't actively want to like exist in such a controversial part of the internet. They do want to see the internet as a place to escape and have fun. And so many people tend to tune out when things get to that point of controversy. I don't know, Bharti, if you have any more thoughts on this subject.
Yeah, I think also when it comes to, outrage and controversial content online, I think something that comes to mind and as a theme that comes up here is kind of rage bait, right? Which people are pretty good at recognizing, and how that is distinct in a lot of ways than just political or ideological content. I think people are very savvy in terms of understanding the ways that algorithms work and what algorithms on social media platforms prioritize versus not prioritize and how that's monetized accordingly.
As far as like how grooming was defined in that question, we gave people a list of things that would be topics that would cross the line. And so for that particular question, we did not specifically say grooming. We more like said it was, I can't remember the exact wording in front of me right now, but it was more just about content, sexual content involving children. People were able to also put in other and have an open-ended question, and that's where we got a little bit more insight on how people define different things for that particular question. As Ross's question is about the full list of podcasters and influencers, it was a pretty in-depth list. And thank you to people who took the survey because it was a pretty meaty list. But it is available. So when we send out the crosstabs and the top lines, you should be able to see that full list. And we broke it out by different categories as well.
And in response to the question about the corner of the internet, so all of the options there were a good place to learn new things, mix of different views, focused on hobbies, a place where people mostly stay quiet and observe, very political intense, chill or fun, full of people who think like me, supportive and affirming, nerdy, exhausting and overwhelming, et cetera, et cetera. And that will also be visible when we send out the full data associated with this particular survey. And we did disaggregate for gender, including across age. So you will be able to see young men versus young women, so on and so forth across the different age breaks.
And I think we answered most of the questions.
Amazing. Impressed with
more. Trying to stay in the time point period for you guys.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. This was great. And yeah, we can follow up, and please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We appreciate all your time, and we hope you have a wonderful Friday.